Fans. Today I want to talk about Demetrius Johnson and his documentary. And the question is he the greatest fighter of all times and probably the greatest ambassador of all times? Because if you got to look at Demetrius Johnson. Hey, what's going on, fight fans? Today I want to talk about Demetrius Johnson and his documentary. And the question is he the greatest fighter of all times and probably the greatest ambassador of all times? Because if you got to look at Demetrius Johnson, he didn't have anything that will consider him a standout fighter. Like, he wasn't tall like a John Jones, or big like a Brock Lesnar, or something that separates him from everybody else, like great footwork and striking like an Anderson Silva, or great Brazilian jiu-jitsu like BJ Penn. There wasn't one thing that made him stand out as that guy. He was short, average looking for the most part, but he was one of the most dominant fighters in his weight class. So what made him so good is that, he just stuck to the game plan. He just stuck to the game plan, and he wanted to make sure that he was the best at what he can be. But the problem is nobody can appreciate that when it comes to about just making money. So because he wasn't a shit talker, because he didn't run his mouth, because he didn't just go out there and just say everything he had to say to make a fight happen, he wasn't considered the best, right? But now look at him, top of the food chain at one championship, won the Grand Prix, and then won the title at 135. So you can't deny that he has done it better than the majority of the fighters out right now, like a John Jones, arguably George St-Pierre, BJ Penn, all the guys who stumbled along the way. But like I said, his legacy, Demetrius Johnson's legacy, will be intact. He not only would be considered one of the best, he will be considered one of the best ambassadors to ever do it. So let's go ahead and talk about how all this came about. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's look at his documentary. Let's talk about it.
Will release Demetrius Johnson, allowing him to sign with one.
Why would the UFC dispose of their greatest athlete?
He has the lowest selling pay-per-view in the history of the UFC. This is potential.
All right, so let's think about that. Let's think about Dana White saying he had one of the lowest, pay-per-view numbers in all of the UFC. Okay, when somebody like Dana White goes out there and says he's not that good, or says he's not a draw, then it becomes gospel because he's the president of the UFC. So now, since he's the face of the UFC, everybody has bought into it, even though that wasn't the case. Even though he was one of the most exciting fighters in his weight class. The things he's done as a mixed martial artist, not many fighters have done. Not many fighters has won in spectacular fashion. Not many fighters have the most title defenses like Demetrius Johnson. Not many fighters has went to multiple promotions, which for him is two, and been champion. How many fighters has that accolades? Not many. So let's continue.
Actually groundbreaking news.
I heard you had something to do with it as well. The idea of a trade in mixed martial arts. Can you remember this ever happening?
I love the deal. I love it.
Demetrius Johnson appears to be headed to one, and Ben Askren appears to be headed to the UFC.
So let's look at that trade specifically. Okay, between Ben Askren going to the UFC and Demetrius Johnson going to one. Ben Askren was pretty much undefeated going into the UFC. Maybe he had one loss, but I don't think he did. I think he was 19-0 at the time going into the UFC. He was champion in Bellator. He's fought everywhere. Could nobody beat him with primarily a wrestling style. That shows you how good of a wrestler you are when you're primarily winning with just one particular style. He wasn't known for striking. You know, he didn't have great jiu-jitsu. You know what I'm saying? He was just a superior wrestler. And I didn't realize how good of a wrestler he was until I started really looking into him and having people that I knew the game talk about how good he was. Ben Askren, I mean. Yeah, I was like, wow, I know he was a machine like that, but okay, right? But did it transition into MMA? Yeah. For his time as a mixed martial artist, yeah, 19-0, Bellator, won. I believe he was a one champion. You know what I'm saying? So then here comes Demetrius Johnson, who left on a loss. Dana White saying they're going to get rid of the 125-pound division. He wasn't a great ticket seller, yada, yada, yada. How does that look going to another promotion? Now you have to build yourself up all over again, right? So he had to make a name for himself at one, because that's not going to translate like you think. Even though he was multiple time champion with the UFC, you got to wonder if that's going to translate at one championship. You know what I'm saying? And let's see how it went down.
Question was, in the waters of another organization, would he sink or would he swim? From a troubling childhood
People come out there and put us in the corner, put our hands up.
to greatness. This is the untold story of Demetrius Johnson. Before the trade, there was the most dominant UFC champion in the history of the company.
You know what synthwave is?
All right, so you heard him say it, the most dominant champion in the history of UFC, which means, I think it's 11, 12 or 13 title defenses. Who has that right now? Right? Went up to 135, which wasn't his ideal weight. It is now because he's older. But back then in his prime, 125 was more reasonable because he's not a big guy. He's not going to gain but so much weight. But yeah, he's still able to be successful and dominant at a higher weight class. Then when he came down, he was completely dominant at 125. Could nobody touch him. He beat everybody in his division multiple times. But yeah, he wasn't getting pay-per-view buys. He wasn't getting the accolades. Even though he got them, Dana White wasn't giving it to him. Right? So he wasn't getting the push that he should have gotten. Right? So when this trade happened, it was the only right thing to do for Demetrius Johnson's career. Let's continue.
No.
It all started for the legend with the introduction of the flyweight division into the UFC, a four-man tournament to determine the new undisputed champion.
Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight!
The tournament would place the lofty crown upon the head of a young, hungry Demetrius Johnson. But as the goal...
Okay, so he already, established himself as one of the best because he won the tournament at 125. Now, I'm not sure if the 125 division came over from WEC or not, because I can't remember who all came from WEC, and was there? I don't think there was a 125-pound division before the WEC came over, or they got bought by the UFC. That part I'm unsure of, but I don't think they had a 125-pound division right off the rip. I think it was created because of WEC. I think don't 100% put that on me. For some reason, I just believe that that's how it went down, because I can't remember when the 125-pound division came on board, but it looked like it happened because it's Grand Prix, and there was a reason because a lot of small fighters was coming over from WEC, if I'm not mistaken. But let's continue.
The belt shimmered around his waist, and the arena echoed with thunderous applause. I doubt they understood what this man's future would entail, nor the dark path that led here.
64% of African American children live in fatherless homes.
You've never had a relationship with your father?
Yep, never seen a picture, never seen nothing, but it's a part of life,
DJ's life would start a statistical probability for newly born African Americans.
Okay,
without a father. His mother...
I'm not going to go over his all that trauma. It is what it is. I'm going to go ahead and speed past that a little bit and just kind of get to him, making his rounds.
Had earned his first shot at UFC gold against the consensus bantamweight GOAT, Dominic Cruz.
Okay, now he's fighting Dominic Cruz at 135.
And still bantamweight champion of the world.
One thing was apparent.
Dominic Cruz was in his prime at that time. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, he was doing big things, and he was knocking it down. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of hard to go against somebody in their prime, number one, and a heavier weight class at that time. You know what I'm saying? But like I said, it was a good fight. It was a close fight. But like I said, that's what he was up against. That wasn't his ideal weight at that time, because 135 was all they had. 125 wasn't growing like that at the time. Or I don't think 125 was even around at that time. So let's continue.
In the fight, and to be honest, his whole career previously, DJ was severely undersized for the division, which in retrospect simply adds to Johnson's legacy. A move up in weight class is often branded as a brave turn in a combat athlete's career, as they attempt to challenge those bigger than them. But for DJ, it was an inherent problem. He was one of the lightest fighters in the lightest division the UFC had, and he wasn't alone in that fact. There were many other fighters undersized and losing not because of talent or skill, but just sheer size. And so,
all right, so think about that. You know, you have to fight up because that's the only way you can get a fight. You know what I'm saying? The 125-pound division wasn't established yet. So if you wanted to get on a fight, you had to fight bigger guys. And those bigger guys were already coming down from heavier weight. So if you don't have to do anything, you know, if you have to go up in weight to make 135, okay, you're putting on more size, you got to eat more calories, you know, that muscle density hasn't been established for you to carry that extra weight easily. Okay, and then you got somebody who's coming down from heavier weight. Once they hydrate, they're going to be bigger, even more so. You know, how are you going to be able to handle all that extra weight? You know, now it comes down to skill. That's what it's supposed to be. Mixed martial arts. You're supposed to be able to handle, you know, bigger guys. But like I said, when all things are equal, the bigger guy is most likely going to win. So that's what you're up against when you're somebody Demetrious Johnson size. All right, let's continue.
So it was no surprise when the UFC opened the flyweight division at 125 pounds. Those fighters placed at a disadvantage would migrate down to the new weight class. The UFC crowned its new champion with the aforementioned tournament, and Demetrius may have came out on top, but there were other fighters looking to prove that they were worthy of championship gold. But being worthy doesn't necessarily mean that you are capable. See, Demetrius was destined for greatness, and that belt around his waist wasn't going anywhere.
Yep, like I said, you know, guys like John Dawson, who's still making the rounds. John Johnson is now in bare knuckle fighting, doing good things. You know, Benavidez has retired. You know what I'm saying? So all the guys that came up around Demetrious Johnson's era are either retired, no longer fighting, or their career has declined, or they're doing something completely different, like bare knuckle. Demetrious Johnson is one of the only fighters at 125 still striving and being successful at that weight class. You know, he's up now, but you know, is still on top of his game in another big promotion. How many fighters have done that? How many fighters can say they're able to be successful at that weight class, at the weight class, be able to switch to this different promotion and still get back on top? Not many. Let's continue. And that's another thing. It's not only winning, it's winning spectacularly. Because that's how you're going to be judged. If you're just eking out victories, like a lot of people gave Khabib a lot of criticism because a lot of fighters, you know, went the distance, or he just, you know, grounded and pounded them to victory, stuff like that. A lot of people say that wasn't exciting, right? But Demetrious Johnson was finishing his opponents through knockouts, you know, high submissions, you know, arm bars, and submitting him in the last 10 seconds of a round. You know, he was finishing his opponents in spectacular fashion showing that he was a cut above the rest. He wasn't just eking out victories. And that's what we got to look at. He wasn't just being mediocre in his wins. He was doing it at a high level against high opponents. When you made it to the UFC, you were supposed to be the best. And he did this in 13 title defenses? That means you were the number one contender or even the top 3, fighting Demetrius Johnson. So you got to look at that. So that's what a lot of people forget in his wins.
From 5-round slugfests to last-second submissions, knockouts, and flying armbars, Johnson carved out of the history books his name, the most dominant champion of all time, a record that still to this day is seemingly going nowhere. For me, when I started watching the sport, he was the reason to tune into an event. Technically brilliant, defensively sound, but perhaps most...
And that's what you got to look at, is that's what a legacy is all about. Not only how many fights did you win, who did you beat, and how did you beat them? Okay? If you beat them in spectacular fashion and you put on great fights and you overcame adversity and you shown why you're the champion, that makes a champion. That makes a GOAT. You know what I'm saying? That you've shown this how superior you are to your opponent. But like I said, if you're barely winning, or you're winning on judges' scorecards, or a lot of fighters saying you didn't win, but the judges gave it to you, that could be a negative on your GOAT status. But if you're winning in dominant fashion and you're winning in spectacular fashion, that sets you apart. And Demetrius Johnson has done that, and can nobody question that he didn't, right? But when you make it all about money as the defining factor of how good you are, or pay-per-views as the defining how good you are, then you could be a losing fighter that has high pay-per-views and be considered a GOAT because you brought in the most money. Okay, so there's many ways to discredit a fighter when you simply keep it in dollars and cents. All right, let's continue.
Importantly, seemingly unbeatable, the politics of the sport didn't concern me at the time, and well, to say I was surprised at the events to follow would be an understatement. In the background of Demetrius Johnson's historic title run, there was something far more sinister going on. The details of Johnson's mistreatment were brought to light in an open letter raised by DJ on June 5th, 2017. A 2,000-word breakdown of the mistreatment that Johnson had faced was
And that's what we're talking about now, is Demetrius Johnson's mistreatment. And he's brought it up on his podcast because he's went over the documentary as well. And I'm doing this for my take because he has a fight coming up in March, which I'm excited to see. But he says like how low he was getting paid as a champion, as a multi-champion. Ain't like he just got the belt. He was getting paid like he didn't have the belt. And that was the problem that he was having with the UFC. He couldn't get pay-per-view buys. They wanted him to fight the top guys, but yet he wasn't getting paid to fight the top guys. And that's the problem he was having. He said he wasn't being treated like a champion, right? The most of the things I've seen when you're a champion is right out the rip, you make champion money, $250 and up. If that ain't happening, then are you considered the champion? When you're getting paid like an average fighter, and that's what he was talking about. He wasn't getting paid like a champion, and that's when he had the problem. All right, let's continue.
Champion in the organization, from failure to promote their greatest athlete.
Sean and Dana have confirmed UFC's lack of desire to put any effort into promoting us.
Threatening to shut down the division.
A couple of years ago, we were actually talking about getting rid of the division.
No pay-per-view points.
Deny giving me any future pay-per-view points for all my future flyweight fights.
And force...
All right, so think about it. This is Dana White saying this. He's saying we were thinking about shutting down the division. It's not worth having, but yet Demetrius Johnson is still a champion. It's still a champion. Okay. Which means you saying that the belt has no merit, has no value. Even though you're a champion, we're not going to pay you anything. Okay. So it doesn't matter that as a champion, you're going to be the main event. You're supposed to be the highest paid and you're not. What does that say? That being a champion and having a belt has no value. we'll pay you whatever we want to pay you. There's a lot of fighters who didn't have belts that were making more money than Demetrius Johnson. How is that supposed to work in combat sports, where the title holder is one of the less paid fighters in a promotion? That doesn't make any sense. All right, let's continue.
Him to take fights that made no sense.
Dana angrily told me that I am fighting TJ.
For an organization that professes its professionalism and intent on legitimizing the sport, why were they so ready to scorch the division to a smoldering pile of ashes? Well, business often lacks moral choices, and the UFC puts money well before the sport itself. Demetrius Johnson's time at the UFC was coming to an end, and despite the call from DJ to have an honest conversation about the mistreatment of his career, the UFC never got back to him. A year goes by.
As you heard, when you put money before the sport, and I get it, at the end of the day, it's a business, right? You're here to make money. You're here to put on shows that people pay for. But then again, if you discredit the fighters that you want to fight for you, as Dana White has done multiple times, how do you expect people to get on board? If I say this fighter sucks on a regular basis, and he's not worth watching, even though he has the belt, why are you going to watch it? You're going to spend your money elsewhere. So you see how Dana White was painting Demetrius Johnson in a bad light. So how could anybody get on board when Dana White is the face of the UFC? He was the one always painting the narrative and telling the stories. Who's good and who's bad. Who should you follow, who you shouldn't follow. He wasn't just putting on shows. He was putting on shows with narratives, saying who's this and who's that. See what I'm saying? So you see how it was looking for Demetrius Johnson, how there's no way he can catch a break when you have somebody like Dana White saying what he's saying. Let's continue.
DJ loses the belt in a controversial split decision to Cejudo, and well, what happens next was unprecedented.
Ben Askren to be traded to the UFC in exchange for Demetrious Johnson.
Demetrius Johnson just left the UFC and went over to ONE FC.
People are like, I feel bad for DJ, but let's be clear right off the top. You're really happy about this, correct?
Yeah, I'm extremely happy.
He's going to be fighting in an organization where he can knee a grounded opponent.
I think to be considered one of the best to ever do it or best in this sport is you got to compete all around the world.
Although the future of the flyweight division is now imperiled.
So look at that. So Demetrius Johnson was excited about what was getting ready to happen, because now he's able to not only fight other fighters, he's not being held back. He's going to fight fighters who's built not only in his weight and height. He got a more even playing field at ONE Championship, and they just want good fights. Back then, it wasn't about shit talking and hype and noise and all that kind of good stuff. It was about great competition with honor and respect and dignity, and that's who Demetrius Johnson was. He wasn't all about the shit talking. That don't mean he couldn't do it, but that's not what he was all about. He was all about putting on good fights. He was all about being respected and being treated, correctly, and that's something that, fighters can appreciate, even though the entertainment factor of rivalries and, backstories and how this fight came together and a little bit of controversy, that still needs to be there, but not overwhelmingly like a Conor McGregor who just takes it too far, stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? So it made perfect sense to Demetrius Johnson at that time. For him, we didn't get it as fans. We thought Demetrius Johnson was being shitted on. You know what I'm saying? Ben Askren, I think he ran his course at ONE, so he's looking for a new home. He said he always wanted to fight in the UFC. So it was something that for the powers that be, made perfect sense. And look how it turned out for Demetrius Johnson.
Is truly the home of martial arts. It's not just mixed martial arts. They have kickboxing, Muay Thai.
He loves the idea of starting new in a new organization.
DJ was finally free, and he was headed to Singapore.
Now, the great thing is I've been to Singapore. Hey, that's something that I was able to accomplish as a media guy, so I'm definitely appreciated for having the opportunity. And I was able to go to a ONE event. They put on some of the most spectacular shows you will ever see when it comes to combat sports. They have taken entertainment to a whole new level. So if you have a chance to see ONE Championship live, I recommend you do so, especially when they come to the States. They're coming to Colorado. So if you want to see something great, I recommend you go to One Championship. You will be blown away. I'm gonna put a link in the description below. So definitely, this is something you should definitely do, because you will never ever forget it. Trust me, because I surely did, and I enjoyed every minute of it. All right, let's continue.
The West may have dominated the combat sports scenes with the rise of the UFC, but as all combat fans know, the spiritual home of martial arts is in the East, and for One Championship, they have owned that space for over a decade now. Rising from the ancestral ashes of Pride and Dream, the CEO of One wanted to give to the fans an organization that not only showcased the honor and skill of the sport's greatest.
All right, so let's talk about that. Chatri has built a I don't want to say global, but he's definitely built he basically have the Asian market on lock, just like the UFC is supposed to have the States on lock. So he's done something great, right? And he's built it to where the fighters are on equal playing field with the UFC when it comes to competition. So getting ready for that UFC versus One Championship rivalry is coming real soon. I really feel that at some point in the next couple of years, you're going to see a mano who was the overall best fighter in the world versus who's just the best fighter at their promotion. That's coming. Where we're going right now is, I think it's inevitable that we're going to have world champions and not just champions of a particular promotion. All right, let's continue.
Athletes, but to do so in a way that would put on a showcase of talent, prowess, and respect. One Championship events can include Muay Thai, grappling, kickboxing, and MMA. From contender fights to title fights to tournament system Grand Prix that harken back to the blood-infused, one-night gladiator-esque evenings of.
And that's something to definitely think about, is that with One Championship, you can mix it up. You can get a Muay Thai match, a kickboxing match, a jiu-jitsu match. You know what I'm saying? I heard they did boxing at one time, and an MMA. So you got so many. A super fight is a super fight. A best match is a best match. And that's what Chatri is trying to do, to make sure the best fights happen. It doesn't matter what combat art. You know what I'm saying? They want the best match. So that's why when Demetrius Johnson fought Raw Tang, it was MMA versus Muay Thai. And they mixed it up between skill sets. One was Muay Thai and the other one was MMA. That was genius to see what a fighter can make adjustments when it comes to a different art style. And it was great. Demetrius Johnson once again proving just how good he was. You know what I'm saying? So you can't argue what Demetrius Johnson has been able to do. All right, let's continue.
Pride and Dream, and Demetrius was there to cement his legacy. He understood that to be considered the greatest of all time, then facing those warriors in the East is the only way to prove it. And if there are any doubts as to the level of competition that One had on its roster, then just looking at what happened to Demetrius's peers in their transitions speaks for itself.
1 minute left in the first round. I want to grapple with him.
But losing wasn't exactly something that worried DJ at this point.
Wins.
And you got to understand, a lot of people saying when you're fighting at the UFC, you're fighting the best fighters. And that can kind of put a different mindset in your head, thinking that wherever you go, the competition is going to be less. That's not One Championship. One Championships have some of the best fighters as well. Just because you don't know their name and you didn't have the opportunity to follow them. Because like I said, Pride and Risen, you got to go find those fights. You're not going to be able to get them live pay-per-view like you can now. And back then, you had to go look for those fights. You had to be able to get a channel that was that's necessarily in the United States. So it was a lot of hurdles to learning about other fighters that you can find now. Now with the growing of social media, you can find a fighter and learn about them. But back then it was hard to find, international fighters, because if they weren't in the UFC or they weren't on a platform that you had access to, there was no way you were going to know who these fighters were. But now that's changing with everybody doing partner deals with streaming outlets, that now you can stream international sports where you couldn't before. That's why a lot of fighters weren't well known even though they were high-level successful fighters at that time. Let's continue.
And losses happen in mixed martial arts. But at the end of the day, you know, I hope you can be focused on taking care of what matters most, which is your family.
Despite those peers who had stumbled before him, Demetrius was not deterred, and that new beginning looming on the not-so-distant horizon brought with it an interesting and dramatic road to the ultimate goal of one flyweight world champion, a 3-stage Grand Prix with 8 men in contention for the tournament belt, and ultimately a shot at the man atop the division. Demetrius's mindset going into the first bout in the East was focused and realistic of the challenge that awaited him.
Because of who you are.
All right, so let's think about that. Once again, Demetrius Johnson had to prove himself to be considered one of the best by doing yet another tournament in order to be considered the best. So once again, when the 125-pound division kicked off in the UFC, he had to do a tournament, right? Now, to prove himself at one championship, he had to do a Grand Prix tournament, which had more fighters fighting in that tournament. So once again, even though he was a 12, 13-time champion in the UFC, he still had to prove himself to be considered one of the best at one championship. They just weren't going to give it to him. You know, maybe it could be because he was an American fighter. I don't know. But he wasn't given a pass. He had to earn that pass, and that's exactly what he did. Let's continue.
Because of what you did in the UFC, that you're just going to come in here and run through this draw. But I don't imagine that you're taking it that way, right?
No, not at all. That's the perception on North America audience, is that even when the true fans of mixed martial arts, they know that there's a bigger world out there than just the UFC, Bellator, PFL.
Alright guys, watch out for headbutt. Low blow back of the head and spine. I want to flip that fight. Touch girl if you want.
All right, and let's look at that. So here's what a lot of people don't know about one championship is that if you're down with the promotion and you're doing good things and you're working with them and you help build the brand and you're being successful, they work with you more so than a lot of people recognize. Is that they make ways for you to stay active and make money, behind the scenes, and not just, when you fight. Like with the UFC, the only ways you're going to make money in the UFC, just with the UFC, is that you get your show money and your win money. Then you get your sponsorship money, right, which ain't much. And then you may get a fight of the night or submission of the night bonus. Those are the only ways you're going to make money in the UFC, unless you're a champion or a main eventer and you get pay-per-view points, which is the cream of the cream. If you get pay-per-view points, then you're making real money. But outside of that, you got to scurry for your money because they're not going to let you get sponsorships, that you can show on the UFC airtime. You can get a sponsorship away from it, but you can't market it on a UFC airtime. Where one championship, you're allowed to, if I'm not mistaken, you're allowed to get your own sponsors. They're going to work with you. You can work with them on other projects, things like that, to where you have more opportunities to make money. It's just not going to be, you sitting on the sidelines waiting for your next fight. They'll work with you if you got something of value that you can add to the growth of the company. So I'm saying, so it ain't going to be just cut and dry like with the UFC, where they try to hold you down, making just enough money to function like a regular job, where you have to show up every day in order to get paid, or you're not going to make enough to take care of your family, which sucks. And that's what Demetrius said. He said, hey, I need to provide for my family, but I want to do it in the best way possible with dignity and respect and all the things that come along with it. So let's continue. All right, so we're going to pause that. So he was successful in the Grand Prix. Now we get to continue on. Okay, him finally going for another title.
It's a prestigious moment for any combat sports athlete that is often so lacking in the West.
I just like Grand Prix belts. It's just big and meaty and it's heavy and, so for me, I almost want to call myself the belt collector, but
One championship had not given DJ an easy ride to the title, but over the course of a grueling and demanding year, he had earned his shot at the current flyweight champion, Adriano Moraes. Step after step down the ramp toward the cage, the greatest fighter of all time was knowingly waltzing into the shimmering haze of a battle that would further distance himself in the discussion of who the greatest was. Life is transient, but legacy is...
Okay, and think about it when he fought Morales. After he got knee TKO'd, knocked out against that fight, a lot of people had already figured that Demetrius Johnson had reached his limit. You know, they were saying Demetrius Johnson got knocked out for the first time, and that's normally where it goes down for a lot of fighters. When they get knocked out, they begin to slowly lose their edge. You know what I'm saying? Now, age is a factor. You know, the older you get, your chin don't hold up as well. So a lot of people figured that Demetrius Johnson was done at this time. You know what I'm saying? Also, yeah, he did great, you know, but now he's being exposed and yada, yada, yada. He's too small for the sport. Fighting these bigger guys, he just can't seem to get it done. There's a whole bunch of stuff being said about Demetrius Johnson and his ability to, you know, fight bigger guys at the biggest stages at that point, right? So when he got TKO'd, knee knockout, a lot of people were saying, okay, he might be done, you know, and I heard it, you know, and I was like, man, so once he gets knocked out, it's over. So that shows you just how much, you know, fans are fickle, that they can quickly dismiss you because of one loss at that time. So let's continue.
Forever.
Both on the rules, fight fair, fight clean. Temper if you want.
Staying out of reach of the hands of Demetrius, almost walked into a high knee there, did DJ. He got caught by Moraes. A knee on the jaw. DJ's hurt. It's good night, Ivy. Adriano Moraes.
And I'm so happy because Demetrius Johnson came to the championship, you know, like, and opened this door for me again, one more door. So,
and now let's not discredit what Morales has done. Beating Demetrius Johnson, you know, when he was on a tear like he was, it's still a huge accomplishment. You know what I'm saying? So we're not gonna knock what Morales has did. That's a feather in his cap that can't a lot of people can't say. Only a handful of people can say they beat Demetrius Johnson. You know, now granted, a lot of times there's bigger fighters. You know what I'm saying? Anybody who's his size and who's truly his weight don't beat him. It's normally the bigger, taller guys like a Dominic Cruz, like a Morales, that tends to get it done. But when you're on equal playing field, you don't get it done. Like Cejudo didn't get it done, in my opinion. He lost both times to Demetrius Johnson. They were both on level playing fields, and Demetrius Johnson was better, in my opinion. But if it was the UFC and it's what they wanted, is why I think Henry Cejudo lost. I mean, that's why I think Henry Cejudo won in the second fight. But, you know, Demetrius Johnson gives him credit for being a great fighter, and he can see why he's good. But I still don't think Cejudo won the second fight. But Morales got it done, and he got it done in a spectacular fashion by getting the finish. And that's what you want to be able to say, I finished this fighter. There's no controversy. I stopped them. That's why I'm the best. And that's why I got the belt. You know what I'm saying? All right, so let's continue.
The opportunity to test myself against him. I love the rules of my championship. You know, I've been in the championship 8 years already.
Hey, goodbye, brother.
All right, and as you see, Demetrius Johnson, he didn't say anything negative about it. You know, he just got back to work, you know, and said, hey, I had to learn something about myself, that it's not all about the win, it's all about the fight. So he humbled himself and he made the adjustments, you know, for the second fight, you know, and he pretty much said it. You know, let's listen to what he had to say.
Top, those two guys were kind of on a win streak, and you know me, I'm by the code.
right? It's like you lose, take your ass back down to the ladder, work your way back up, give the other guys opportunities to get a chance to fight for the belt.
Well, that's what he thought. One championship, however, had other plans. One that would bring a fresh new take to the combat sports world. A hybrid fight with one of the most flashy, devastating and technical Muay Thai fighters of all time. The current one flyweight Muay Thai world champion. A man who had accumulated 250 wins in the game by the age of 21. The man is a wrecking ball in the cage and a guaranteed showman. His name? Rodtang. But this wasn't any ordinary fight. Rounds 1 and 3 would be Muay Thai, 2 and 4 MMA. The question was, would DJ be able to survive the onslaught of the first round? That infamous barrage of violence that was well known to spew out of Rodtang? Or would he survive to the second round and show what it means to mix all martial arts? Well,
all right, so let's look at that. Rodtang was an unbeatable record machine. Not only that, he was one of the most well-recognized fighters in all of Asia. He is a megastar in Asia, right? Not only because of his name, because of his fighting style. He was a juggernaut. You can't hurt him. You know, his leg kicks are destructive. His strikes are destructive. He destroyed many of fighters with 250 fights, and he's still standing with still a granite chin. You know, nobody was giving Demetrius Johnson, you know, that much shot at winning. We knew if it made it to the MMA side of the game, it's going to be a different story. But could he get there? He had what, 3 minutes to survive Rodtang, and if you can hurt him and back him up, he gonna come at you, you know, the whole round. So that's what Demetrius Johnson was up against, and the fact that he was able to do what he did make why he's such an iconic fighter and an ambassador of the sport, that he was able to do what he did at one championship against Rodtang. All right, let's continue.
well, there was only one way to find out.
Get into the second round of action.
And you see, of course, you know, we didn't watch the whole thing, but you see, he got the submission, right? And now he's back on top, right? Now he's back on top. Now the conversation of a rematch with Morales is now on the table legitly. They're not giving it to him. He earned it. He earned another shot at the title, which is why, you know, one championship is doing better than the UFC, because they're just not giving you anything. You're earning your way back up to a title shot, which is supposed to be the ranking is supposed to matter. You being in a winning position matters to be able to go for the belt. All right, let's continue.
Two men were showered in victory that night, both walking the streets of Singapore with another win notched into their deepening legacy. And so there was only one natural progression from this point, the rematch. A chance for these two men to determine who the best was. A chance of redemption for DJ. And for Moraes, a moment to show that greatness is not determined overnight, but through patience, hard work and grit. It was a night to show that determination to stay in the game despite losses is what separates champions from contenders. What was on the line could not be overstated for these two men, and the East would play host to a rematch for the ages.
Tomorrow night, you have the opportunity to not only...
All right, so like I said, so now the stage is set for an iconic fight rematch for Demetrius Johnson after beating Rodtang. Is he that guy? Can he overcome being after that knockout from his last fight? Is he that guy? Is he the guy that everybody believes he's to be? Can he still rise to the occasion and be the top of the food chain and still be the top in his division? And like I said, that pressure alone, normally a lot of fighters can falter. Okay, when you're on that pressure of the biggest stage to be considered the GOAT, the best to ever do it, and only a special kind of fighter can win in such a spectacular fashion, like Demetrius Johnson did in the second fight. That has now set himself up for the rematch, you know. So let's look at what he was able to do to separate himself from everybody else in the pack. You can say what you want to say, How many people has done this like Demetrious Johnson? Maybe Anderson Silva, but that's about it. Let's watch. So what does that say about the greatness of Demetrious Johnson? That he was able to overcome all the adversity from leaving the UFC, being treated how he was treated, being a champion but never getting truly paid like a champion, not getting pay-per-view points, getting traded, right? So he didn't get release of his contract so he can go do some other things. He got traded for another fighter, which is, I don't think has never been done before that I know of, right? So goes there, have to go through another Grand Prix competition in order to prove his worth again, like basically coming from the bottom back up, winning the Grand Prix, losing to Morales, for a title shot, fights Raw Tang, submits him, then goes to the rematch with Morales, flying knee TKO knockout, right? That puts him right back in iconic status again, which he never lost. But it just proves just how good of a fighter he is to overcome adversity and show that he can win in dominant fashion and spectacular fashion like he does. Crunch time, he delivers. Not many fighters can do that. Now they're going for the third fight, and I think it's going to be just as iconic as the other two. And we'll once again see that how great of a fighter Demetrious Johnson is. Win or lose, it's still going to be a spectacular fight. You know what I'm saying? So this fight coming up, man, it's going to be worth it, man. I can't wait to see it, and it's going to be something that we can only, appreciate just what Demetrious Johnson has done, man. He's considered the GOAT for a reason, man. He's considered the GOAT for a reason, and to deny how good he is just doing him a disservice, right? So the question is Demetrious Johnson one of the best to ever do it, and is he considered a true ambassador of mixed martial arts? So that's what I think, man. Hey, I want us to do that quick. Not only is quick, I want us to do that, a rundown of my view and my take on Demetrious Johnson and that documentary we just seen about his career. All right, hey, this is Coach D, doing what I'm doing, calling it like I see it, talking my share of shit. Till you hear from me again, peace out.